Hi, I'm Mimi Geerges. General Michael Hayden became the director of the National Security Agency in 1999, then CIA director in 2006. He'll discuss espionage, security, and privacy.
We knew Al-Qaeda was going to attack Americans or American interests. We were a bit off stride in the fact that the attack was against America, in America, of this kind of scale.
Welcome to the Mimi Geerges Show. The National Security Agency handles signals intelligence. The CIA handles human intelligence. Michael Hayden, a four-star Air Force general, headed both agencies during the 10-year span of 1999 to 2009. He played a key role in the response to 9/11, the Iraq War, and the issue of where to draw the line between security and privacy. He's written a memoir called Playing to the Edge: American Intelligence in the Age of Terror. General, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
You say that American intelligence is really pretty good,
Yep.
but how can we believe that when you missed 9/11 and you totally messed up the intelligence leading to the Iraq War?
Well, to begin, what I say in the book is that intelligence is its own world. It lives in a space that other aspects of society never live in. I mean, we've got a legal system, for example, that's designed to prove things beyond a reasonable doubt. The purpose of intelligence is to enable action even in the face of lingering doubt. It's far more a world of grays and ambiguities. I was doing a talk, probably my first year as director of CIA, to a bunch of actually prominent Americans and investment bankers. And we did a kind of a one over the world, what's going on. And first question out of the gate, General, on a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate CIA analysis? And I paused and said, well, sir, the first thing you have to realize is we don't do 8, 9, or 10. If you can get a question to 8, 9, or 10, they're asking the Department of Commerce about that one. We get the ones that are inherently ambiguous and gray. And we often get it wrong. Often it's too strong a word. We admit that we get it wrong, but we do the best we can. And I would hold our record up against any other intelligence service in the world.
You were director of NSA during the attacks of 9/11.
Right.
Did you have any idea that some kind of an attack was imminent?
Oh yes, I mean, George Tenet in his memoir talks about the system blinking red. We knew that an attack was imminent. We actually had about 3 dozen warnings in intercepted communications throughout the summer of 2001 that something was imminent. Something was going to happen. We did not know the details of the attack. There was nothing of an operational nature that you could have gone to the president and said, Mr. President, you need to go do this. And here, and this is very important, and I fully admit this, all right? We knew Al-Qaeda was going to attack Americans or American interests, all right? We were a bit off stride in the fact that the attack was against America, in America, of this kind of scale.
So you were expecting it overseas?
Because that had been the routine behavior, that had been the history. When you get chatter on the network, when you can see that their network is anticipatory of something. The historical record was a bomb at an embassy in East Africa, or an attack against a naval ship in a port in Yemen.
But it seems the problem is we're always looking back at the last attack and not planning for the next attack.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's human nature, all right? I mean, what's the cause for that? Original sin, all right? Yeah. I mean, we live in a world where these things are very tough. And one of the things you have to guard against is what we call the tyranny of expertise, which is you've studied this issue so well that you know exactly how it's always happened in the past. And so there is a danger that your very knowledge, your very depth of experience leads you to miss discontinuities. Fast forward. The Arab Awakening. A young Tunisian man immolates himself because he's insulted by a policeman. Riots against Ben Ali in Tunisia. I was out of government by then, but I do believe the first American intelligence estimates had been, Ben Ali's seen this before. He knows how to handle it. And of course, he didn't.
You testified to Congress back in 2002. You asked the members, where do you want us, the intel community, to draw the line between security and privacy? It's a tough question.
It is, and here's what happened. We Americans have been trying to balance two things, both of which are virtues since the birth of the Republic: our liberty and our security, our safety and our privacy. And the mechanism we used to do that was we institutionally and legally said, all right, all the foreign intelligence stuff over here, all the law enforcement stuff over here, all the foreign threats, that side, all the domestic threats, this side. And we gave these guys a lot more authority than these guys for reasons that should be clear: foreign intelligence, domestic law enforcement. Right? What happened on 9/11 is those 19 terrorists drove right through that gap that we had created between foreign and domestic, between law enforcement and intelligence. So now the great challenge after 9/11 is, how do we as a country decide we're going to close that gap that we had consciously created in order to balance things, again, both of which are virtues?
I mean, I can answer that question. When I'm feeling safe, I want privacy. And when I'm not feeling safe, then I want security.
And so I allow myself an existential whine, W-H-I-N-E, in the book. And I say, the experience of the American intelligence community is, this is from American political elites. I don't get this trying to buy an Iron City at Heinz Field in Pittsburgh, all right, when I go home. This is from American political elites. We simply say that they feel free to criticize American intelligence for not doing enough when they feel in danger, and immediately turn and begin to criticize American intelligence for doing too much once they've been made to feel safe again.
I want to ask you about a surveillance program called ThinThread. You decided to nix that program. Supporters say that it could have prevented 9/11 and that it could have detected that attack before it happened.
This was a technical issue. This was a disagreement among good people, not differently valued people. This was, what's the best way to do the mission? The ThinThread approach was one approach. There were other approaches. One of the problems with ThinThread is that prior to 9/11, which of course it would have had to have been in effect to do what it was you just said, prevent 9/11. So remember the Millennium Weekend, all right? And we were kind of all on the top step of the dugout, not just for Y2K,
right,
but we also thought there was increased threat of terrorism in the United States. And in fact, an alert Border Patrol agent picked up someone in Puget Sound.
Right, trying to come into the
country with explosives to go against Los Angeles International. So we know this. I mean, we know our duty. We tried to protect America to the best of our ability. And so people came into my office. I was director of NSA at the time, all right? And my ops folks and my legal folks came in. Says, we've got a faction here who wants to use the ThinThread approach to do metadata, which is what ThinThread was about. The fact of a call, not the content, to do metadata that it would allow us to chain through U.S. numbers. Now, my lawyer said, the law doesn't permit that, all right? That dog is not going to go hunt. And I said, try. Take it to justice. Go down to the Department of Justice. Explain to them what you just told me. So my lawyers went down to justice under my direction and said, we want to go do this ThinThread thing. It had to do with American metadata. And the Department of Justice laughed at them. They said, you can't do that. You know you can't do that. That's forbidden by the FICE Act.
This is all before 9/11.
All before 9/11. And so we didn't do it. So I guess the point I want to make is this was a technical question. It's about what's the best technology. It was a legal question. And until the legal landscape changed after 9/11, this was no more or less lawful than any other thing we were trying to do. I talk in the book about ThinThread having some really elegant aspects to it, but fundamentally the best minds in the agency told me it would not scale. It would not be able to handle the kinds of volume of communication that we would be getting from fiber optic cable and other such communication media.
General, what is Stellar Wind?
Stellar Wind is the program we then put in place to solve the problem that the ThinThread folks said they could have solved before 9/11. And fundamentally what we did, under the direct authorization of the president, this was raw commander-in-chief giving us the authority to actually acquire American metadata. Now, we didn't collect it. You know, there's no, metaphorically speaking, no alligator clips on any wires here, all right? But we did go to the American telecommunication providers and in essence said, give us your billing records. for everybody. I have never made an attempt to trivialize this. This is billions upon billions of records going into this massive database on a routine basis. But again, it's what would normally be in a phone bill. Who called whom, when, and how long. And we put it there, and it was in that database absolutely fallow until we stimulated it with something called a seed number. And I'm sorry, I'm pulling you through a SIGINT, a Signals Intelligence Operational Knothole, but this really matters, right? Look, I get it. The people at NSA went to the same high schools as the rest of the population. We are all part of the same political culture. We are all very uncomfortable with our government having a gajillion data point phone record database out at Fort Meade. So it becomes very important. So what happens to all that data? And what happens is simply this. If NSA learns of a phone number about which it has a reasonable, articulable suspicion that that phone number is associated with terrorism, specifically Al-Qaeda, we roll up a safe house in Yemen. We get what's called pocket litter. And, oh, wow, this is a very bad man. And he's got a cell phone, which we've never seen before. Whoa.
So who's he calling? And is he calling anybody in the United States?
Anybody? So we get to go up to that ocean of metadata, and again, it's an ocean, and say, hey, being cartoonish, hey, anybody in here talk to this phone? And let's just say a number in the Bronx goes, well, yeah, I do that about once a week. NSA then gets to say, who do you call? And I'm done. That's the end of the metadata stellar wind program.
And this had never happened before.
Oh God, no. And in fact, ThinThread was attempting to do something like that pre 9/11, but of course pre 9/11 there was no presidential authorization to do it.
This was made public by the New York Times in 2005. Do you have actual examples of when the press makes something like this public that we lose intelligence value?
The best example I can give you is a more current one, and that's the Snowden revelations. Rick Leggett is the current deputy director at NSA. I knew Rick from my days out there. He was a fast burner back in the day. In fact, somewhat groomed for the job. Rick has gone public and simply said that at latest count, NSA believes it had lost approaching 1,000 foreign intelligence accesses to legitimate targets that had changed their communications patterns because of what they have learned from the Snowden revelations.
Let's talk about Snowden, because this was in 2013. He was a contractor at NSA. You had already left government at that time. When you first heard about this, what was your reaction?
So I'm in a motel room out in La Jolla, California, and I get a cryptic email from a journalist. Title of the email is, "What the heck is this?" And then it was a hyperlink to an article in the London Guardian, which was the Stellar Wind program. I clicked on the article, read it, said, whoa, I'm not answering this email. Because in essence, what was being written about in the Guardian was the metadata Stellar Wind program.
Is the NSA still doing that?
NSA still has access to American telephony metadata. It no longer stores it. What's happened is based upon the USA Freedom Act, NSA has been told not to gather the data itself. Let the data sit out at the phone companies, but you can still do your magic. You can still ask. Now it's a little clumsier. I mean, when you've got it all in one place, you can ask one question, and it's pretty easy to chain across, right? Now you've got multiple carriers out there, multiple providers. You got to ask them each the question, and if you get a hit, now you've got to chain across separate databases. I would say operationally, what we have now is about the 85% solution of what we had then. But given the unarguable American public concern about the government holding the metadata, that's the kind of compromise we make all the time.
But who's going to even do that now as far as the bad guys? They're not going to call an American number because they know that you're watching and listening.
Now that they know, that's right. And so what that does is it drives them into other forms of communication, right? And look, I freely admit, this is always a pursuit. You are never, okay, we've solved this problem. There's no way these guys can communicate. We're not going to know it. I mean, they are a learning, adaptive enemy. They will adjust. We just make it easier for them to adjust when we make public things they don't already know.
Do you want Snowden to come back to the United States?
In stand trial.
What would you say to him?
First thing, you have the right to remain silent.
When you first got to CIA, one of the issues you had to deal with was enhanced interrogation techniques. Critics call it torture.
Yep.
How useful was it, really?
Yeah. So, stellar wind thing, I did that. All right. I was president at the creation of that controversial NSA program. I inherited the program at CIA. We called it RDI, renditions, detentions, and interrogations. And I frankly spent the summer of 2006 figuring, all right, what have I inherited here? What's been going on? Because changing legal landscape, because of congressional interest, because of Pulitzer Prize winning stories in the Washington Post, all right, this was a very controversial thing. And the president, the administration needed me to come say something. What are we going to do? So I spent the summer of 06 pretty much getting a PhD on this topic. I mean, I had big binders I would take home on weekends and read and try to master. I talked to interrogators. I talked to analysts, right? And at the end of the summer, I went to Steve Hadley. I said, look, here's what I think. This has been a successful program. We have gained information that we would not otherwise have gotten, or certainly would not have gotten in a timely manner. That said, Steve, we're the nation's intelligence service. We're not the nation's jailers. We shouldn't be keeping these people forever. And so I actually found my notes from that meeting doing research for the book, and it was, all typed out. And I think I made 5 or 6 points. Number one, we're not nation's jailers. We should empty the black sites, and we did. Over Labor Day weekend in 2006, we shipped 14 people to Guantanamo. We didn't close them, and that was the second point I made. Steve, we need to empty them. We should not close them. I think we still have to keep this option on the table. Number 3, we need greater political consensus going forward. We can no longer base this just on a narrow legal definition that it's okay to do. It needs political legs. And so I propose we brief all members of the intelligence committees. They'd only briefed a small group before. And frankly, the president needs to make a big speech and go public.
It's no longer happening now.
No, it's not.
If a future president wanted to use any of these techniques on maybe one very high value individual, could he authorize it?
Well, number one, the law's changed. All right, the law's changed even from the law that I had to deal with, but it changed from the law George Tenet, one of my predecessors, had to deal with. Right now, according to American statute, right, the only techniques any American organization can use for interrogation are the 19 techniques in the Army Field Manual, which frankly are very conservative. And so you either have to change the law, or you have a bit of a constitutional crisis with the president simply saying, to the degree that that limits my authorities as commander-in-chief, that law is unconstitutional, which has happened in our history. And so the first issue you have is the law itself. Beyond that, it would be very hard to convince the Central Intelligence Agency to go do this again.
Because they don't want to do it either.
No. Well, yes, you're correct. They don't want to do it, but why don't they? It is not a rejection of their past, right? It is not their saying that was a bad idea and it didn't make America more safe. When a CIA officer is asked to do a covert action, and this was a covert action, right, something that affects global events in which you want the hand of the U.S. government to remain hidden, he gets to ask his director 3 or 4 questions. Do you think this is a good idea, boss? Yeah, I think it is. Is the president authorizing this? Yeah, he is. Did you tell Congress? Yeah, we have. And what's the Attorney General say? Is it lawful? Yeah, he says it's lawful. At that point, when that officer goes out and does that, he thinks he's got a social contract in perpetuity with the American nation, not a 2-year handshake with the current administration. And what you've got, because of the sharp change in direction when it came to interrogation, and frankly, the new administration being very critical and reopening closed investigations of CIA officers, you've got a whole generation of CIA officers. They're just not going to go do this because that bond of trust on this particular issue, I realize this is a very harsh statement on my part, but that bond of trust on this particular issue has been broken. I have said publicly, if a future president wants to waterboard somebody, he better bring his own bucket.
You say that we've made it, quote, so legally difficult and so potentially dangerous to grab and hold someone that we would simply default to the kill switch to take terrorists off the battlefield. Yeah. Just send in a drone and he's gone.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing from your perspective?
No, it's not, and on several levels. Now, by the way, if I were to say that to John Brennan or Susan Rice, the current National Security Advisor, they would say, oh, no, that's not our policy. If we can capture, we're going to go capture. And
we haven't captured anybody in a long time.
That's my point. I get the theory, but the practice is we're kind of in the place you just described. You know, I was chatting with some folks on air about this, and they talked about how bad interrogations were, and it's better that we're doing what we're doing now, and then went on to drones and so on. And I said, yeah, you realize there aren't any good choices here? You know, these are all very difficult choices. I mean, we have a right to defend ourselves, right? And when you come down to the really possible actions you could take, capture and kill are pretty much it. And because we've made this so politically dangerous and legally difficult, that it seems as if we more often than not just default to the kill switch. I don't have ethical problems with that, all right? I mean, this is a war. I mean, it is a war, not a law enforcement action. It is a war. But on operational intelligence grounds, you don't learn much when you've targeted someone from an unmanned aerial vehicle.
Speaking of bad choices, while you were at CIA, you dealt with the Iranian nuclear program. Mm-hmm. What options?
All bad choices. Yeah.
What do you think of the Iran nuclear deal now?
Yeah,
is this the best that we could have hoped?
You know, we could extend the show here another 2 hours, and I could fill the space complaining about the current deal. That said, the last line in the book on the Iranian chapter was something along the lines of, I don't think we'd have bought this package, but it's not that we had a whole lot of better ideas either. And so I certainly respect the problem the administration, the president has in dealing with the Iranian nuclear program. I think we should have driven a harder bargain. I think all we've done is push the problem down. If it's successful, nobody cheats. All we've done is push the problem out about 10 years, but it's still going to be there. And now we've got an Iran that used to be isolated and sanctioned and poor. It's no longer any of those things, and it hasn't changed any of its other behavior.
What do you think is the biggest intelligence mistake the Obama administration has made?
Number one, the breaking faith with officers. Okay, and then that actually has a long-term effect. That would be one. Secondly, and this is not a dynamic confined to the Obama administration, all right, but there are some examples here. It sounds like I'm critical of them. I don't mean to be. This is kind of like the human condition. In intelligence, we have something we call the phenomenon of the unpleasant fact. When you go in and you're briefing the president or some other decision maker on something he really doesn't want to hear, you're briefing him on an intelligence assessment that cuts across his preferred politics or his preferred policy. I suspect something like that happened that prompted the president to call ISIS the JV, the junior varsity.
That's an intelligence failure.
Well, I'm not sure of the dynamics, all right? President Lincoln is famous for saying General Meade in the Civil War had the slows. And I'm not sure whether we had the intelligence slows here or the policy slows, but we certainly had the national slows in embracing what kind of threat ISIS was. I suspect, this is not fact-based, but my instincts tell me that when you're going in there with something that so much cuts across the preferred narrative, right, saying it isn't enough, you got to reach across the desk and metaphorically, grab the National Security Advisor by the lapels and say, listen to me, this is really bad. And I'm not sure that happened.
General, I want to ask you about the situation with the FBI and the iPhone.
Yeah.
The FBI wanted to crack open the iPhone of the San Bernardino shooters. Apple refused to help. And then the FBI said, never mind, we got it.
Yeah.
Does NSA know how to crack open an iPhone?
Apparently not. Yeah, no, seriously. I mean, all my instincts of government, no special knowledge about this case, but all my instincts of government is if NSA could have done it, they would have done it. And then I get questions from public, well, come on, give me a break. NSA can do that. And I go, compare the R&D budget of Apple to the R&D budget of NSA, and you may have your answer.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
You know, you've said that espionage is essential to democracy.
Yeah.
How do you make that link?
Sure. Look, frightened people don't make good Democrats or Republicans. You get the point, all right? Frightened people do things about their own liberties, and particularly their neighbors' liberties, because they're frightened, right? Right after 9/11, I talked to the NSA workforce. I talked about all the things we're going to go do now. And I ended up with this. I said, look, free peoples have always had to balance always had to put their banner somewhere on this continuum, this spectrum between security and liberty. And we Americans, protected by two big oceans and friendly or weak neighbors, have always been able to put our banner up there close to liberty. That is now at risk because of these attacks. And so here's the mission. You and I are going to keep America free by making Americans feel safe again.
And that is done by espionage.
Espionage is a magnificent tool. And by the way, if we fail, it's just not American security that's in danger. It is American liberty.
What's your biggest regret from your days at NSA and CIA?
Well, I enjoyed it all and made the best decisions I could as I went through. Looking backward, I wasn't bad in leaning forward and telling Congress things. I wasn't bad leaning forward, putting a public face on the agency. I really mean that. I mean, kind of ask a self-description. But I didn't put enough energy into either. I do think that because of our changing political culture that demands a certain degree of transparency to underpin any sense of legitimacy, more of that would have been better.
General, I want to thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you.
Nice talking to you.
Thank you.
This has been the Mimi Geerges Show. You can connect with us on social media and leave me your comments there. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me again next time.